Hi folks, I couldn't find a video I liked that gave a good example of some of the more advanced functions in Google Spreadsheets, and spreadsheets in general for that matter, so I just figured I'd record this one for you. So the first thing I want to show you, this isn't a formula, but it's something that's good to know. If we click and drag to highlight these three cells, then we can click this paint bucket and change the color. And you can do that, of course, for a range of cells, and you can change it to whatever color you would like. And I'm just going to press Command Z or Control Z to undo that. So what I really wanted to talk to you about are functions or formulas. Functions and formulas are the really useful thing that you can do with spreadsheets. Now right off the bat, we can see if we click and drag to highlight these three cells, we get a sum down here in the lower right hand corner. Demonstrate that with these three cells and these three cells. Now you can see it's not an exact sum because it only shows two significant figures. That's two numbers after the decimal point. Now if you're doing scientific calculations, that may not be enough. So we'll show how to do more than that here in 1 second. The other thing to note, if you click on this, it gives you the option of having this little corner display the sum, the average, the minimum value, the maximum value, the count of items, and the count of numbers. Now how these two differ, because that is not readily evident, the count is sort of the count of values. So see, if I select more than those three and go to count, it's still 3. Now if I type in some letters or something that is not a number and I highlight these, see the count is 5 because there are 5 items, and the count of numbers is 3. So that might be useful depending on what you're up to. Now what I really wanted to show you is, as you remember, if we type equals, then we can put in formulas and functions. One to be aware of is sum. This is very useful. We can enter values to sum in two ways. So if we take the cell identifier of A1, put a comma, type A2, comma, A3, and a closing parenthesis and hit enter, then it will sum these. We can do this, click and drag, check sum, and see sure enough that's the same. Now typing out each of those cells is a little bit cumbersome, so a shorthand notation for that same value is if we click on this cell, press enter to start editing, I'm going to remove those and type A1 colon A3 and press enter, and that's the same value. This selects an entire range of cells, and one thing to know, that if we want to select, say we don't know the numbers or whatever, or we're not interested, one thing we can do is called the point and click method. So if we click here and then hold the shift button down and click here, it'll automatically insert that colon. The other thing we can do with this method is, of course, click and drag, and that will also put those in the shorthand notation. Now what if you want to do columns? Well, that works too. You just have to indicate the letter, so C1 from A1 to C1, and that works if you go down as well. So it goes from A1 to C3, it selects everything. And what's the sum of all those numbers? That's kind of a nasty looking number. Another function that is really handy that is used a lot is average, and this works exactly the same way. We can click and drag to select our average, and never forget to put the close parenthesis, because if you do, you'll get an error. So one thing we can do to show you what that error looks like, when we click a cell, you can see that the contents of the cell are displayed here. By the contents, I mean what's actually in the cell, not the value that's represented. So here what's actually in is this function. So if I remove that parenthesis and press enter, it does a really good job of auto-completing it. It's really hard to mess that up. So if I put that in, it gives me a warning. So that's something that is very nice. I didn't actually know it would do that. One thing to know though, if we put something in that's not correct, that it doesn't know how to account for, like B1, B3 without the colon, it throws this error. So those are some very handy functions to be aware of. One thing I would like to talk to you about, in addition to the standard operators, the plus, minus, divide, multiply, and exponent that was talked about in the video that I posted a link to, many of these have additional functions, like you can type add and then two numbers. This is almost equivalent of sum. I'm not entirely sure why you would use add and two numbers when you could just as easily type equals A1 plus A2 instead of typing out add. It's really kind of interesting. There's also divide. You can type out the entire word divide. Again, I'm not really sure why, maybe for clarity, so when glancing through the formulas you can see, oh well, that's dividing, and that's maybe a little bit easier to read than the slash, the forward slash that denotes the same thing. Just something to know. Another really easy way of inserting functions is to come up here to the functions drop down. You can click on that and you can put in sum, average, count, max, and min, and I highly recommend that you play around with these because you can do some fun things, and that's the best way to learn. So if we click on more functions, it will take us to this support page where it lists all of the functions that are available, and there are some very handy things in here. What this is something I wrote up that will take the scores for the various assignments in this class and calculate what the letter grade is based off of the values that you received for your grades. You see, as we change these, the various values all around here change to match what is there. So that's pretty handy, and these use formulas. I'm using the round function. Here I'm using sum. Here I'm using this if error, round, and average. But you don't need to know about these yet, but it's just something that it's good to know about if you want to make kind of a really nice looking spreadsheet. There are a lot of functions. So I want to talk about multiple sheets. Now this area where we've entered this information is called either a sheet or a workbook, depending on what software you're using. Now sheet 1 and sheet 3, these are not very meaningful names. You know how I feel about meaningful names. So I'm going to click rename, and I'm going to call this Comp 101 and press enter. So once I've renamed this Comp 101, I want to click on sheet 3 to look at this. Now what this is, as this is a GPA calculator that I created when I was an undergrad. Now I used this to keep track of what my overall GPA was and what it might be as time goes on. This was just more of a way for me to learn how to use spreadsheets than anything. Now when I copied these values over here, some of the formatting went away. So really fast, I know I already talked about this, but if I click and drag to take these, you can see this is all for one particular term. This 2138 is a particular term. That's much easier to read. Now the way, of course, to do that is to highlight a certain number of cells, click this little paint bucket, and from there we can pick whatever color we want it to be. Now one thing I wanted to show you is if we look at this where it says score, one thing we can do when we're using multiple sheets is we can type equals and then click on our previous sheet and take this score and press enter. And then when we come back, we can see that this is being updated from this sheet. Now that is incredibly useful because it allows you to create something like this where you can keep track of your score in a class and come back here and have it automatically updated so you can maybe keep track of what your GPA is. Now this isn't something I expect you guys to do right away, but it is something I would expect you to be able to do by the end of this class. Honestly, by the end of the next few weeks.